From Tridio Media, I'm Father Roderick, and this is the Daily Breakfast. Hi, and welcome to a new episode of the Daily Breakfast. I'm Father Roderick, and today I want to start the week with a movie review. And just like last week, it's going to be a science fiction movie that premiered on Netflix. I assume that many of you are subscribers to Netflix, so I try to pick the movies that are launched universally. That's one of the cool things about Netflix, is that with their new content, especially with the content that they have co-produced or co-financed, they want to make sure they have the rights for every country in the world, which is not necessarily the case with a lot of their other movies that they buy or that they license for just particular countries or for TV shows. But this movie premiered worldwide, as far as I know, on Netflix. And in contrast with the last movie that I reviewed, this one is really, really good. It is called Annihilation, and it stars two major Star Wars actors who are now a couple in this new science fiction movie. I have to say in advance, this movie is nothing like Star Wars, where Star Wars is optimistic, it's fun, there is action, there is a little bit of philosophy. This movie is somber, it is scary, sometimes it's a bit like a horror movie along the lines of the Alien franchise. But it's also chock full of deeper layers, and that is what makes this classic science fiction. This is a movie you watch first, and then you watch it again, and you start to discover, well, wait a minute, my first reading of the movie was just, it's a good story, it's intriguing, it is kind of scary at times, definitely worth your time. But then the second time, you start to think, well, wait a minute, I think there is another message. There's the deeper layer here. The story actually wants to tell more than just a scary story. So I'm going to be talking about those different layers in this movie. And I'll also try to keep this spoiler-free. It's difficult because a lot of the deeper layers are revealed towards the end of the movie. But I think if you go watch it, and if you are a Star Wars fan and you're an adult because it's not for kids, come back to this and you'll probably see what I'm hinting at. So I can't go into a very detailed analysis. Let's start with the two main characters, because I was super excited to see that we have both a character or an actor who's played a character in the prequels, Natalie Portman, Queen Amidala herself. She plays a biologist named Lena. And she is co-starring with Kane, her husband Kane in the movie, that is, who's played by Oscar Isaac. Now, the reason that they've asked Oscar Isaac for this movie probably has to do with the director of the movie. His name is Alex Garland, and he directed another one of my favorite science fiction movies, Ex Machina. If you haven't seen that movie, it's all about artificial intelligence and kind of robots taking over the world in a certain sense. It's a very intelligent movie, definitely worth your time. One of the most intelligent science fiction movies that I've seen in a long, long time, and that's also the case with this movie. Well, in Ex Machina, the main character was also played by Oscar Isaac, who in that movie is completely unrecognizable. I mean, he's bald, he's got a big beard, and I had to blink twice when I read on IMDb that he was played by Oscar Isaac, because you can't tell. In this movie, he looks just like Oscar Isaac, and Natalie Portman just looks like her character Amidala in Star Wars. A bit older, since, prequels is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But it was almost shocking to see two Star Wars characters, very recognizable, in a new setting. However, the story is so good that you very quickly forget that you're watching these Star Wars characters. Also because the characters that they play are so different from their Star Wars roles. So that's a good thing. I mean, that's of course acting. Like if you see Bruce Willis, he always looks the same in every movie. But he's also often typecast. A lot of the roles resemble other roles. And so sometimes when he's in a different movie, you're very surprised. And like Schwarzenegger trying to play real drama without saying, "I'll be back." In this movie, we're talking about two really good actors. And the rest of the acting crew is also amazing. So what's the story about? It's based on a novel by Jeff Vermeer, and actually a series of novels. But it's not really an adaptation. It's inspired by the novel in the same sense that some of these newer science fiction series on, let's say, Amazon Prime. I'm currently watching an amazing one. I forgot the name. But anyway, the series that is based on Philip K. Dick's novels, it's an amazing science fiction series. But they're just taking a few ideas from those stories and then they spin a totally different story. That's the same here. The one who, I'm not sure who it was, who wrote the screenplay for this movie said he had only read the first novel once. He completely changed almost everything, and he almost forgot about everything else in the story. But I think it still makes for a very intriguing standalone movie. So the way the movie ends, I think it's very hard to do any sequels, although you never know. Apparently the movie is doing very, very well for Netflix. So there is potential for a sequel, but then they'll probably have to completely reboot the entire idea. So the story, what is it about? We're in the United States. And scientists have discovered a very strange area I think it's on the west coast of the United States, where what looks like a meteorite has hit a lighthouse. But then very soon, strange, unexplained phenomena are starting to occur in the area, and those phenomena are starting to spread. There's what looks like almost like a bubble, and when kids are blowing bubbles with a soap, like a soap bubble, that's what it looks like. So the area is kind of enclosed in a certain dome, and the light is refracted on the surface of that dome. So it looks a bit like a soap bubble. And they have sent in people to enter that bubble and see what's going on there, especially because they've noticed that this bubble is expanding. And so, of course, there are security reasons to send in people. And the problem is, and this is all in the beginning of the movie, so I'm not spoiling anything, nobody seems to come back from that bubble. So there is definitely also a danger. There's something unexplained. And then at one point, the character played by Oscar Isaac comes back from one of those missions. But he's been away for more than a year. And Natalie Portman's character, Lena, has trouble recognizing her husband. He looks the same, but he behaves so differently. And then, for various reasons, which I will not go into because of spoilers, she decides to enter the bubble, to enter the shimmering, as it's called, together with 4 other women scientists. It kind of had a hint of the female reboot of Ghostbusters, but this is a very serious movie. And what we discover later on in the story is that all these women have a very specific reason to go inside on what could be seen as a suicide mission because it's so dangerous and so few people have made it back. Now, the world inside that bubble is extremely dangerous, and there are some moments in this movie that are very terrifying. I was not prepared for this. I thought this is going to be... the movie was described as intelligent science fiction, but nobody told me about the horror aspects of it. And man, there are some moments in this movie that are genuinely like scary on the level of Aliens. Really, really scary and very well done. The moment they step inside the bubble, they start to notice that the world inside that bubble is completely different. It's almost like a different dimension. Things are recognizable, but they're weird. They're like mixed up. It's almost as if everything inside the bubble, just like the light that shines on the outside of it, is refracted, and you see these kind of rainbow colors. The same happens to everything inside the bubble, not just light, but also time and space and even DNA. And that's the last thing I'm going to say. The rest you'll have to discover for yourself. And then what happens is this journey towards the lighthouse to figure out what is going on and is this a threat and how can we stop it, etc., etc. I'll tell you one theme that is very important to keep in mind when you're watching this movie and that will help you also discover the deeper layers of this story. The movie is called Annihilation. And for about half the movie, I was wondering why that title. I mean, it sounds cool, but the title kind of hits the central theme of the movie, which is kind of this tendency. There's one of the characters that at one point in the movie ponders about this. Like, why is mankind always so on auto destruct? We live, and that's the general theme. It's a good question. Why, if the world has so many beautiful sides, why we're made for there's so much potential in our world and in ourselves to do good, then why do we always at one point in our life auto-destruct? We overeat, we don't exercise. We know very well what we should do to be happy and to make other people happy, and yet we do the opposite. It's kind of what St. Paul says, I don't do what I ought to do, and I do what I shouldn't do. It's that paradox of sin ultimately. And so and that brings about destruction. And then there is a very deep connection between what happens inside that sphere, inside the shimmering, and this mechanism that people seem to have, that they always at one point in their or another in their lives, they start this auto-destruct mode. And is there a way out? That's the big question. And the ending of the movie has to do with that question. Like, is there a future if everything ultimately will end in annihilation? Or is there potential for something new? And that, of course, is a theme that I like as a theologian, because it reminds me of, similar questions in faith. Why do we sin? Why we know so well that we shouldn't? Why do we do that? Why do we hurt other people, even though we know that we shouldn't? And if we make other people happy, that will make us happy as well. So why the violence in our world? Why the destruction? And is there a way out? Now, of course, oftentimes in our current situation, and also in the fiction that is created, be it movies or there's a lot of or TV shows or fiction. We have a lot of grim stories, somber stories that seem to indicate, well, there is no future. Whereas from the perspective of faith, you would always say, well, there's always the possibility of starting anew. And redemption is sometimes not something that you can bring about yourself. That's why in Christian faith, there is a savior. You cannot save yourself. You need someone else to save you, and that will help you to make a new beginning. That's the whole concept of the sacrament of reconciliation. And that is why you can't just kind of auto-absolve yourself. That is why in the Catholic faith, there is always a priest or a bishop who hears your confession and tells you that you have been forgiven by God. So redemption comes from the Savior who saves you and who will actually help you to make a new beginning. And in a certain way, this is a science fiction movie. We're talking about a mysterious alien occurrence in the world where these themes of annihilation, destruction, the auto-destructive nature of mankind, and the hope or the potential, at least, for something new that can emerge, and what needs to happen first before you can start anew. Those themes are very much woven into the fabric of this story. So again, it's a movie that is definitely worth your time. Intelligent science fiction that has I think, a deeper message than just a cool kind of aliens, who will survive this quest to get to the lighthouse type of movie, which it is on the surface, but there's much more going on. And so I think Netflix has a hit on their hands, and I was super excited to see this kind of science fiction. And that's probably also the advantage of streaming media. Platforms like Netflix, like Amazon Prime and Hulu, they offer opportunities for filmmakers that they would never have in the theaters. I don't think that this movie would do well in movie theaters, because people would probably not want to risk paying, $10, $12 to see a movie that is kind of weird and not very marketable, because you can't really talk about these deeper themes. You first have to have seen the movie, and word of mouth in this genre is always kind of hard. But on these streaming platforms, we've seen it also with the Cloverfield Paradox. They can just try out something and see if it sticks. And with the Cloverfield Paradox, I'm not sure how well that movie did. Probably not as well as they thought it would. But this movie is a hit, and I think that it will only motivate platforms like Netflix to invest in more of these movies, which, of course, for science fiction lovers is great. So, highly recommended. It's a great movie, but again, it's pretty full of horror sometimes, and it's not for kids. All right, that's it for this episode of The Daily Breakfast. Thank you for listening. I'll be back tomorrow. And I want to give you a hint. There is way more to come over at Trideo Media. And one of the reasons that we're going to start our first Trideo Fund Drive after Easter is that we want to realize 2 big projects, one of which has to do with the connection between faith and the world of science fiction. You'll have to listen tomorrow to get some more hints as to what those projects are going to be, but I already wanted to give you a hint that we're going to do this fund drive between Easter and Pentecost. That's all I'm going to say. Go to Trideo.com for more information, and I'll be back soon. Take care, and God bless.